Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Personalization in the Marketplace. This is a deep dive on the restaurant industry. I'm Dan Stephen, Director of Partnerships at Amplitude and your host for today's webinar. I'm really excited today to be joined by our friends Bottle Rocket. For those of you who don't know, Bottle Rocket is an experienced consultancy that provides business strategy, product design, technology services that drive business results and solve unmet needs. The team at Bottle Rocket has been designing and building digital experiences for some of the world's most loved companies for the last 13 years. If you've ever ordered a chicken sandwich on the Chickfila app or booked a flight on mobile with Southwest Airlines, or if you're a member of Caesar's Entertainment loyalty program, you've seen their work. And that's just the tip of the iceberg for what these guys can do. Amplitude, the leading product intelligence company, has been partnering with Bottle Rocket for many years to help companies of all shapes and sizes, all levels of digital maturity, make the most of their digital opportunities to drive revenue, loyalty, and growth. Before we jump into today's presentations, though, I want just a few housekeeping matters. This session is going to be recorded and shared out after the event. So keep an eye on your inbox if you want to see the recording of this and share later on. As well as if you have any questions throughout, please use the Q&A or the chat function. At the end of the session, if we have time, we'll get to these live questions. So let's get started. Today's content has been produced by the Bottle Rocket team, who have spent the last few months doing extensive research into 6 national brands and a variety of their channels. Today, we'll be presenting their insights, best practices, things to avoid, and actionable ways to improve personalization in your channels each and every day. In addition, they'll share the joint personalization maturity curve that we produced together and the various levels of personalization and why personalization is important for today's restaurant brands. So you're not here to hear me talk, you're here to learn from the experts. So today's presenters are Peter Clayman, Director of Business Strategy at Bottle Rocket, and Tim Duncan, Growth Practice Lead at Bottle Rocket. I'm going to hand it over to Peter and Tim, who are going to walk you through their presentation, their insights. As I said, please put questions in the Q&A and we'll get to them at the end if there's time. Over to you, Peter.
Thanks so much, Dan. So I'm going to pop this deck open. First off, really excited to be here with everybody today. We're excited to share some of the research we've done over about the last 2-month period. So before we hop in, let's just talk a little bit about the agenda for the day. Dan has helped us with some introductions. You've gotten to know us a little bit better. We're excited to share more about who we are and kind of our frame on the QSR space and also the broader world of personalization more broadly. We're going to talk a little bit about our research methodology that we leveraged here so that we could get consistent data that's somewhat representative of customer journeys in the marketplace. We're going to talk a little bit about the brand deep dives and results. We won't be able to cover all 6 brands here. We're going to bring the best insights forward. And finally, we're going to share a little bit of our POV on personalization. This is not just applicable to those folks who might be working in the restaurant industry, QSR, or ancillaries. It's going to be applicable to all of you who are looking to implement a more unified approach to leveraging data to increase the way you communicate with customers so they perceive that to be a more one-to-one relationship. And in fact, maybe we'll even get to that next level, talking about predictive personalization, where we can start driving future state behaviors that the customer doesn't even know that they want, but finds really intriguing. So let's start off with the research methodology. Well, you're all here to talk a little bit more about how at restaurant brands, or even more broadly, some brands that we get to know and use with a high level of frequency are leveraging personalization in their digital channels. And when we talk about digital channels here, we're talking about app, web, SMS, push. We're hoping for some direct mail because it's coming back too, but unfortunately we didn't get any in this experiment. And we just kind of want to say first things first. Why is personalization so important, and why is there such a push in the marketplace to start building strategies around personalization? Well, first is around cross-selling and just this notion of customer experience. I think a lot of firms out there are looking to become more and more customer-centric. They're thinking of themselves as product-led organizations. And when I use the word product here, I'm not necessarily referring to product management. I'm referring to how throughout that entire experience that a customer has with your brand, whether that's on the awareness stage, through their first purchase, into that long-term loyalty and retained customer, every touch point on that journey should feel like it was built for them. And the expectation is starting to become that that is the case. Now, how did this happen? Well, it's heavily informed by technology leaders like Spotify and Facebook and others. However, there are practical lessons that apply to a variety of industries. We'll talk more about that. So specifically within the restaurant space, we have seen a huge uptick in use of digital, and that has become in many ways a primary channel moving forward, even in the post-pandemic situation, whether that's leveraging digital to have better interactions in the drive-through or through curbside, or even a better order experience when we do start to see more people coming on-prem to order there. How can we leverage a more personalized approach to creating better experiences end-to-end? We also know that, if you're able to offer more personalized service, which is a high bar to set, and I think that's the biggest thing we've learned today, then we're able to highlight individual customer preferences. And so data, and we kind of have this notion that we should be collecting data, we should have a first-party data reservoir, and we should be leveraging that first-party data reservoir. But why? Well, because if we do that effectively in a non-creepy way for customers, they're going to see more value from it. They're going to raise their ticket sizes. They're going to shop more frequently, and they're going to have an overall better impression of what it's like to work with your brand. So for us, and for many of you out there, I'm sure you're thinking about, well, how can we do this with our customers? We took a very narrow lens here to one part of the customer journey, an easily digestible and critically important part of that customer journey. The first 21 days that you have with a net new digital customer. When I mean net new here, it doesn't mean they haven't been to your drive-through before, doesn't mean they haven't come on premises, but all that signage you've invested in, all those ways you've invested in training to get folks on the front lines, whether they're associate or others, to recommend utilizing a web property or an app, that starts day one. That starts day one of your customer relationship with that net new digital customer. So what we did was, how might we look at the first 21 days of a net new digital customer's interaction and how those brands communicate with those digital customers? So what we did was build new profiles and start anew as if we had never been to any of these brands. So we kind of tried to vary the scope of where we focused to encompass a variety of different casual situations and settings and use cases, as well as frequency. Yes, we'd all love to have the frequency of Starbucks as a coffee shop. That's not necessarily true. So we tried to go across the spectrum. On that far left side, you'll see firms that are generally seen as market leading in terms of digital penetration, Panera, Chickfila. We have Taco Bell in there as well, as a firm that has had a long-standing series of digital investments, but lower overall penetration. We have Starbucks, which time and time again is represented as best in class, seen as very effective personalization at scale. And then on the far right-hand side, we have some fast casual restaurants, Buffalo Wild Wings, which has seen a pretty high rate of digitization, as well as TGI Fridays, both nationally known brands, relatively good growth potential, different occasions and use settings. So what did we do? Well, of course, not every customer journey was exactly the same, but the fundamentals apply here. We tried to give each of these firms as much access to data as possible. We'd browse their website. We might create an account. We might check out and then subscribe to whether that's marketing or push or SMS. We gave them our phone number. We gave them our email address. We gave them our location. We picked our favorite items. We tried to create the most robust data profile possible. And then we waited. We put some orders in. We saw how they communicated with us, or lack thereof. We looked at how they might want to engage with us, what channels they were using, what types of content they were delivering. Was this content relative to that first order we placed, or was this more universal? We then kind of took that next step once that makes us a known digital customer. You have our information, you know our email address, you have our phone number, you have our location, you have our previous order history. We then took it to that next level. For pretty much every single one of the firms that we checked out, there was a loyalty program. So we enrolled in loyalty. We looked at offers. We might download the application, authenticate on that application, explore the application, pop it up, make sure we're staying relevant on what's communicating and what's possible for us to engage with. So that's kind of the span and the scope. The intent here was to create one of the most robust first customer data profiles. How can we use every channel you present to us? How can we give you as much access to data as possible? How can we do commerce with you so you know we're an identified and probable customer? And then how do you in turn communicate back to us based on how we engage? So we definitely had some expectations as we walked into this. We were expecting that there would be cohorts that were established by channel. For example, you're an application customer. We know you've placed an order on an app. We're going to talk to you as an app customer. We knew that there would be a good amount of variability across the entire spectrum. We knew that there would be really strong firms. We knew there would be really weak firms. And we expected some good variance there. And what else? I mean, a ton of other things, right? We expected all the channels to be utilized. We expected pretty robust use of push. We expected the firms to learn about how we like to engage and what we opened and to communicate with them, with us on those channels. So let's get started and just say we expected more. Now, you could read this two ways. Before we get into any of the data, let's just set expectations. We see this as a great opportunity for coaching and learning rather than a negative. This presents nothing more than incremental opportunities to build stronger relationships with your customers, to allocate your marketing spend more effectively along the entire customer journey, to invest accordingly into how you communicate along the customer journey. So please, throughout this entire presentation, don't take any of this as a negative. Yes, we expected more, but those expectations were likely grounded in other properties, like I said earlier, the Spotifys of the world who build entirely custom solutions for every one of their customers. We are talking about QSRs and restaurants that have deep on the ground physical operations with heavy asset deployment. This is a changing market landscape and change takes time. So take every single example seen here as an opportunity rather than saying, man, we expected more and we like really want to beat everybody up here. That's not at all the case. We just want to highlight some opportunity areas for each of these brands. So with that, I'm going to pass it to Tim. Tim, you want to talk a little bit more about how we looked at this and the lens we applied?
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate that, Peter. I've been following the QSR and restaurant growth space for a while now. I usually look at like iOS app store rankings in general. I'm going through their various experiences, looking at functionality. And the way we looked at this particular set of brands and the way we analyzed them in terms of personalization and messaging, it did leave me wanting more. So let's kind of get into what we expected to see before we talk about like how we scored people. Let's kind of level set on exactly what we meant by that. So when I went into this, before I placed the first order, as Peter said, expect contextual messaging, use of cross-channel notifications, and mainly using the data that you collected on day one in those downstream messages to provide a more relevant experience and content. And generally what we found at a high level is the series of emails that we got was the biggest channel that weren't leveraging the data points that we gave up in a creative way. Across the board between day 2 and day 20, there was generally an overall lack of engagement during that period of time, both on the number of messages sent and the channels utilized. So again, most of those experiences didn't meet our expectations. And I personally thought the biggest thing was, and we're going to show you just how many data points were collected by each of these brands, but it's not necessarily a data problem. It was the lack of incorporating those customer traits into downstream messaging streams. Want to go to the next slide, Peter?
For sure.
Okay, so let's talk about how we scored these brands before we get into any one of them. And the first thing I want to say is like A, B, C, and D doesn't necessarily equate to what you would see in school. These are simply the bars or the levels in the first 21 days that we saw these brands achieve. It doesn't mean we think overall they're average or poor at something. This is just what we saw. And so we broke them down by 4 categories. So in terms of what we would classify as poor, like that's the standard level that we see most often. That's mass marketing, no personalization whatsoever. Everybody gets an email or an offer whenever they sign up, so to speak. So you move down to average, general, more segmentation, demographic-based personalization, where a large group of users would get a single offer. Like I signed up for the loyalty program and I get a loyalty program offer for that. Moving down to good, this is where we really enter into what we'd classify as personalization. This is more of a one-to-one marketing experience. So it's using those properties that you collected, like name, email, pickup location, order history, contextually inside of those messages. So it's personalized on a one-to-one basis. And the last one, what we were classifying as predictive. And so this is the next level of personalization, which is taking all of those customer properties and either making recommendations, suggestions of different content, products to buy, those sorts of things. So think of a shopping cart in the QSR space and recommending something to put into that shopping cart at some point in time based upon your past purchase history. It usually involves a machine learning model and not just simple segmentation rules. So that's kind of the scoring framework that we use and will apply here. So go to the next slide, Peter.
For sure. And just to reiterate, don't expect everyone to be A students here, right? A is aspirational. A C might be very good for many brands as it exists today.
Okay, so this is basically a visualization of what you just saw of those different levels, kind of to bring some clarity here. So no personalizations, everybody gets the same thing. Everybody gets a welcome email. Segmentation is the next stage, or demographic-based personalization, where you take a group of users like loyalty and give them some offer. Personalization, which really enter into the phase where you're using those customer properties that you collect and personalizing a message. Like, for example, order routing with contextual updates in the QSR space is a really good, I think, example of that. And then predictive personalization is where you're actually making a recommendation about a future product or service or piece of content that you think the customer would be interested in. I'll go to the next slide. Okay, one last slide before we get into actual brands. This is an example for the QSR space of what we mean by these different levels. I think everybody hears about the Netflix, the Spotify's of the space, and everybody's probably seen those examples, but translating that to a different industry is usually something that you don't see. So for example, within this Tex-Mex QSR example that we're going through. So everybody gets an offer for National Margarita Day. Everybody in the whole contact base gets an email for that one offer. So we move over into segmentation or demographic-based personalization. All those loyalty customers ended up getting an offer to come in today for a 99-cent taco. Move over here into personalization. It's going to use the past order history, the past 3 orders that we ordered on Thursday, and used a rule to give us an offer, a personalized one-to-one offer based upon our last 3 experiences to come in and drive us in there. And then the last one, you know, this whole like, we think that you would like this new product based upon this machine learning model that we had that predicted that piece. So that's kind of a better way to contextualize it. So let's get into
abundantly clear. That last option is not for everyone. You don't say, I have a new menu item, so we think every single customer of our entire customer base will love it. We say, hey, vegetarian customer that orders in the evenings, we have a new vegetarian-oriented dinner item that you may like. So it's that predictive work that's going on the backside and that data profile. I think the biggest thing that stands out here is you'll see the data doesn't change very much as you move across the spectrum. And in fact, many of your organizations may have all of this data already. It's not for lack of data. And I know we're getting ahead of ourselves, but it's important to recognize this.
Okay, so let's jump into the brand deep dives. We're going to go through 4. You're going to see Chick-fil-A, TGI Fridays, Panera Bread, and Taco Bell. And every one of them, you're going to see a common framework. So let's get into Chick-fil-A first for time's sake. So the first thing on every one of these that you're going to see is, what are the different customer properties in particular that we saw collected throughout our experience? And almost all of these were collected on the very first day when you sign up. And also the progressive disclosure for like notifications and location were also generally asked on the very first day. So what you're looking at here is the data profile that we believe Chick-fil-A had on us on day 1 that can be used to personalize. And you're also seeing kind of the screenshots of where we saw that information for clarity purposes. And go to the next one, Peter. So after we actually looked at the different customer properties that were tracked, we also took a screenshot of every single message that was sent to us within those 21 days, and then organized them in a way to show you what channel they were delivered, and then how many different types of messages did we get. So for Chick-fil-A, for example, you see there's a lot of messages on day one, signing up for a new account, welcome email, your first order email, some contextual relevant updates as you move in, as you pick up your order, that your order's ready. Chick-fil-A is real good about that. And then you also see the different channel breakdowns. So you see the blue and the green on that first one. That means that push was used and email was used on that channel. Yellow means no message was delivered during that day. So after day one, we did get a promo email on day four, which didn't have any personalized information inside of it. Between 4 and 19, I personally felt like there was an opportunity to go further there. There was just a long span of time where I didn't get any messages. Now it picks up back on day 19 and 20 before I place my second order. And on day 20 or on day 19 is when I actually saw the first like personalized email, which was it had my loyalty rewards points balance inside of it and a suggestion to come in. So that's kind of an example of using one of those properties in general. You want to go to the next slide, Peter? Okay, so now let's talk about the levels of personalization that we actually saw in that experience in particular. So lined up to kind of those pillars that we showed you. So no personalization, one-to-many mass marketing. We felt like an example of that was the welcome email. Everybody gets that when they sign up. And so we thought Chick-fil-A achieved that level in the first 21 days. Now for segmentation or demographic-based personalization, that email on day 19 where it had our points balance inside of it, we feel like since you got that email, you're a part of the loyalty program, we feel like that was a good use of segmentation-based personalization. And then over here on an actual personalized messaging that we thought that we got that was contextual and relevant, I feel like a good example of that is whenever you place an order from Chick-fil-A, whether it's delivery or pickup, you get really good contextually relevant updates along that journey. So whenever you get there and somebody's about to bring it out in 30 seconds, they send you a message that says, hey, somebody's going to be out in 30 seconds for your order. So we felt like that was a good example of bringing personalization into the messages during the experience. Now, on the right here, we have an X because we didn't personally see a recommendation from a prediction standpoint in those 21 days. That doesn't mean that we don't think that Chick-fil-A has this in their bag. We just didn't see it in the first 21 days. And that was kind of our bar to measure. Go to the next one, Peter.
I didn't realize this, Tim, but how slick is that they tell you that you might be ordering from a restaurant that's different than your original restaurant? It helps prevent a lot of the errors that you might often see. Misplaced orders along the wrong unit and things like that really makes that customer feel known. That's a nice touch right there.
Yeah, that is a really good example of personalization. Okay, so the last part of these brand deep dives, 4 slides, is kind of the overall score and recommendations. Like we just saw, we think they reached level 3 in that first 21 days. And then overall, like from a recommendation standpoint, I feel like there was an opportunity to engage more with me in day 4 to 21, and also use more channels in that period. After day 1, there was no other channels used to engage with me. I know they have my phone number. I know I have the app is downloaded, so they could send me push, they could send me in-app messages, they could send me SMS. So I think more channels would increase engagement during that period, thoughtfully, obviously. I personally don't ever see many people doing this, but why not ask customers when you sign up what their favorite thing is? Most everybody who signs up for one of the major restaurant or QSR brand applications probably already has a favorite order when they do that. So just asking them outright makes it easier to get that information and start doing recommendations. And then use those properties. You had like 15 of them. Use them in a bigger way down than just one email, which uses my loyalty points balance. And you have my birthday and my pickup preferences. So I feel like you could be a little more creative there in that aspect.
Yeah, it's okay, so interesting, Tim, to see this type of like onboarding. We've gotten really used to, we sign up for Netflix or a streaming competitor, we pick our favorite shows. And we say, hey, we really like these 6 things. We don't like this as much. We're getting used as customers to training the algorithms. You're starting to see it pop up in retail. You're starting to see it pop up whenever there's a variety of SKUs. Yet I think for some reason, there's been some hesitancy in the QSR space in implementing some of those best practices we've seen deployed for 5+ years in ancillary industries.
Okay, so let's get into TGI Fridays. Is the second one we're going to go through. So again, just looking at what are the various customer properties that were collected. All of these were collected on day one when I signed up. And you can see the same general trend, which is had a lot of information and a profile about me to use from a personalization standpoint after day one. So go to the next one, Peter. So again, captured and broke down all of the messages across the first 21 days and broke them down by channel. I feel like there was a lot more consistency here in terms of engaging with me at different points in the time. Don't forget about me after day 13. Didn't get anything until my order confirmation email after that. And again, no other channels used after day one, even though you have my phone number and have the application on your phone. So I think you get a lot more creative there and expand engagement through that lens. Go to the next one, Peter. Okay, so what levels of personalization in those columns that we showed you did TGI Fridays meet? We felt like whenever we opened up the app, everybody got a free chips and salsa offer. I feel like that was a really good example of a mass marketing play where everybody gets the same thing. Then moving over to segmentation or demographic-based personalization. Whenever we did sign up for the loyalty program, checked my mobile inbox and I had a new offer for loyalty members in particular. So we feel like that was a good example of segmentation-based personalization. Now, in the first 21 days after that, I personally didn't see the use of those customer properties in my experience or in my messaging. And I didn't see any recommendations given to me for the next order or any other order for that matter. So we felt like the level that they achieved in the first 21 days was the segmentation, level 2. Okay, in terms of the recommendations for TGI Fridays in particular, again, I think a lot more consistent with the messages across that timeline. I feel like using different channels like a push, for example, instead of one of those emails to engage with me to open up the application could be a good way to break through if you're not reaching them in that channel. And also don't forget about me on day 13. Okay, and then also, I feel like I personally didn't see like the location tracking or like a personalized type experience, you know, and whenever I was doing order pickup, and I feel like those features in an experience in particular right now are really important for the digital first environment. And we would recommend doing that. And then again, using those customer properties that were collected on day one, it's a gold mine to be able to help or encourage people to do different things in your application.
You know, and it's important to message here as well. We understand that there's operational differences between implementing something like more location aware curbside experiences where that has deep operational impacts all the way down to the store associate level versus altering your communication preference across channels and duration. So as you read all this, don't think everything requires an operational overhaul. Some of this is a little bit easier. It's achievable simply by changing the way you communicate to customers. Other of this might require more deep collaboration across multiple parts of your value delivery ecosystem and customer journey. So I also looked at a couple of brands, and two in particular I was really excited about. One was being Panera. They're making some moves in the marketplace. They definitely have some more compelling offers, such as their coffee subscription, which is seen as a little bit more innovative. Really excited to dive in here. I started my entire journey on desktop web because I like to order Panera during the middle part of the day. And sometimes it's easier to do it on desktop because that's where I'm already at. And so throughout my first checkout flow, even though I wasn't a loyalty customer, I provided a tremendous amount of information to them. And I was hoping to see a little bit more in the way of communication. What I instead got was far too many emails about where my order was in the sequence. Now, I understand that when you're using a third-party delivery service provider like DoorDash, you want to make sure you're communicating with your customer to build that one-to-one relationship because you don't actually own that last mile communication and that delivery. You can only communicate around the notion of the order and the order status tracking. So I did receive a lot of emails there, but beyond this, I didn't receive my first push notification until beyond the scope of this research study, past day 21. Once I signed up for loyalty rewards, I was starting to see more and more loyalty-oriented communications all over email. But the situation is that I had already given you my customer information. I was hoping that you were going to be able to communicate to me, not assuming that I'm going to become a loyalty member. So we definitely saw, same like we saw with TGI Fridays, there's a welcome offer for everybody who comes into the program in some capacity, in this case, a free treat. You know, there's some segmentation to say, hey, now that you are a loyalty customer, here, learn a little bit more about what it means to be a loyalty customer. And there is this notion of geolocation aware experiences. And when they're reaching back out to me, they're aware of where my location is. So that feels a little bit more personalized. But we're still not seeing that type of predictive personalization. Now, once again, it's really important us to continue to reiterate. We're talking about the first 21 days. There's a very distinct possibility that there is predictive personalization that occurs at Panera beyond the scope of the study. But the 21 days has a very important notion, and we'll talk more about this later. But I think it's really important to just harp on the fact that that's a make or break moment for some of these brands when it comes to digital. So we gave them a B. We think they did a pretty good job, achieved level 3, much like Tim's perspective. Very big variance in communication there. And there was a lot more opportunity to communicate with me. And please don't send me a barrage of emails when you're giving me information that's redundant. It's just against best practices. Make it easier for me. I'm not going to pay attention if you send me 3 emails in the span of 15 minutes. And then entice me to sign up for loyalty rather than assuming that I will. I think so many of us out there think, oh, well, we're spending so much on our loyalty program. Shouldn't it be obvious to our guests that it drives value to them? And I don't think it always is. I don't think that that's necessarily always the lens through which guests are looking at it. So treat them like a customer that you're trying to upsell, understanding full well it costs you more money when they enroll in the loyalty program, but you've built that program for a reason, and that's to drive loyalty to your customers and to drive long-term customer retention. So how can we do that? Well, we have to incrementally get them to that point. The last one I want to talk about today is Taco Bell. And I have to tell you, I was so excited to do Taco Bell. I mean, they are like a fan favorite in this house. They have great vegetarian options. I'm not a full vegetarian, but I do enjoy how they make it easier for people like me to shop. And especially in the QSR space, they're everywhere. They're open late. They already have digital properties. I like the way they talk in their ads, and whether that's on YouTube or on social, they have a brand voice that's unique. I say all this to say, I was expecting quite a bit when it came to Taco Bell. Gave them a bunch of information, and much like this last scenario, I picked everything out on web first. My first qualm here, that little marker in this middle screen where it says favorite restaurant pickup preference, that map location is at the wrong spot on the map. Now, why is this so confusing for me? Because I looked at the map and I oriented myself relative to the map, and I picked the location I thought I was literally parked in the parking lot of. But because the pin is placed in the wrong place, I ordered from the wrong restaurant and went through the drive-through menu only to not have my order ready because I was at the wrong location. Now, I know this is a data hierarchy issue, and we're not here to talk about that. We're talking about personalization today, but it goes to show you how important it is to be aware of how your guest experience might be negatively impacted by errors or lack of accurate data that's on your core platform. So looking at this, you're going to see something here, which is there was not much in the way of communication. I do think there's a barrage of push notifications that they do send to customers who are somewhat more retained in our loyalty program members, because I previously had one and I know from past experience. The big thing for me to call out here was I opted into marketing communications. I opted in for everything. I gave you all of my information and there was still not this communication back to me. And more frustrating than that, I tried on multiple occasions to place orders in app. And with the Taco Bell app ordering experience, you have to build the entire cart, you have to get to the checkout flow, and I got a payment gateway failure. Now, here it happens twice before I can successfully execute that. The reality is at some point it just turned into a game of me trying to figure out how many times I could try to order Taco Bell and it doesn't work. So you're only going to see 2 of these mappings here, but I had to try 5 distinct times to try to get through this payment gateway error. And I thought, well, maybe it has something to do with my device, the version type I'm running, all these types of things. The reality is I was eventually able to complete a successful order in app. So I don't think that's the case anymore. I think it was just some core root failure. Now, we all have them. It's not the end of the world. It's more so how we recover from that moment. So as we're looking at this, we definitely see some notion of like, hey, come on in. We have this new market item. That's the no personalization example here. On the segmentation side, we started to see points accrued. start to see how we might be gaining towards that, you know, and so that was kind of the gist of where we got with Taco Bell. It was less than overwhelming experience. Now, granted, love their product, really enjoy their convenience, love their location, love a lot of their strategies in their brand. I just had hope for a little bit more. I see this as nothing but opportunities moving forward. So they did get a C here. That payment gateway failure notification is on that right-hand side. As a customer, as a guest, it is really maddening when you're hungry, you want to get an order, you spend the 8 to 10 minutes it takes to build the order, only to get to the very last 7 for that to be a failure. So in that regard, look to ensure that your application functions consistently. And if it doesn't, notify customers who had a negative experience because of an application error and give them something to accommodate that, right? Like I would be much more willing to come back and order again if they had said, hey, Peter, I know that you had tried to order with us yesterday. It seems like you got into an error at the very last minute. Why don't you come back in for $2 off your order next time? That's awesome. I totally get it. Hey, tech doesn't always work at scale, and that's okay. And make more personalized use of push. I think of all the brands we've seen today, Taco Bell does have the potential to have one of the punchiest and zippiest push notification and communication strategies and use of brand, but let's make it a little bit more personal. Let's try to entice those individuals so you feel like you're talking to them a little bit more. And this goes from offers and across the board, right? Especially when it's guests like me, it's very easily segmented. I order black bean products from you. How many people have 95% of their cart just with black bean stuff? Okay, you should know enough to know. Maybe you hit me up with some more vegetarian-oriented options. So coming out of this, that was a lot of data that we ran through pretty quickly, but it gives you a really good framework for how we're looking at these brands. Now let's talk about why we looked at 21 days. So when it comes to our POV, there's 3 main things. I think a lot of us think that low frequency is just the nature of the brand, right? But I think it's actually a symptom that can be remedied within reason. Now, of course, you're never going to get somebody who shops at your brand 3 times a year shopping there every single day. That's not what we're talking about. But incremental improvements to frequency are possible through more robust and personalized communication strategies, really more than anything, driving habitual utilization. We'll talk more about this in a second. The next major takeaway is around organizational structure, right? So the actual notions of how marketing is meant to function and the organizational structure is likely the largest barrier for executing more personalized strategies, not necessarily a lack of data or tools. Now, there are definitely tools out there that can help with that, such as Amplitude, but data, we've seen time and time again, first order originates a tremendous amount of data that we can create a more personalized experience around. And then why are we thinking about these first few weeks of the customer journey? Well, it's the most important. We know from a retention standpoint that 30 days into a journey, you're probably going to have 1/3 of the customers you had on that first day of app utilization. And day 2 of that app is going to have huge reductions. We're all familiar with the curves that look like that over time, where we lose more and more and more customers until it stabilizes. If we invest in keeping guests on the platform, you have built a brand reputation with them. You've gotten them into a location. You've gotten them to order on web. You've gotten them to opt in. That's moment 1. That's moment 1 with that guest. That's not a winning situation. That's when you start. So let's try to invest more holistically across that customer journey that occurs after your first digital order, rather than before the first digital order. And that's a little bit of a nuance here. So one thing we hear a lot when we're talking to clients and prospects is we ask them about guest frequency, and we get one number, purely representative here. All this is purely representative. When we say, hey, we get 4.6 visits per year. Now, buried in that number are some fundamental truths. More than likely, you got some one-time guests that make up that number. And I'm going to call these folks not in your true addressable market. They're traveling through the area. They don't consider you often. You're just food in the right time or the right place. It's circumstantial. They distort that number heavily because their frequency is so low. Then comes this next one, an opportunity-oriented guest. Yes, I might go 3-4 times a year because I'm around there. I've had good experiences in the past, but more than anything, it's not even in the top 10. When I think about ordering food, you're not even in the top 10 for me. Now, if I'm in that part of town and I happen to be there, I remember I've ordered. So once again, this is a relatively infrequent guest. Then we get to those last two cohorts on the right-hand side, the aware guest and the weekly guest. I think we all aspire to have a more weekly relationship. Now, that's not always going to be possible. Not everybody shops at a QSR on a weekly basis. Now, of course, the pandemic has turned all of our data upside down, but we know there's like 20 to 30 occasions for the average consumer on an annualized basis where they're going to leverage some form of QSR, except Save Coffee, right? That's a little bit unique. So let's exclude them here. How can we take that aware guest who considers your QSR, but not their number one or two choice, and make them your weekly guest, where your QSR or your restaurant is now their number one or number two choice? And how does this all link back to frequency? Well, instead of focusing on all your cohorts, start to focus on the cohorts you can influence the behavior on. What we mean by that is personalization is very effective for getting that opportunity-oriented guest to that aware guest category. And think about the incremental revenue you could drive for your organization if you were just able to add one visit, let alone 2, 3, or 4 on an annual basis. And then that aware guest, why aren't you their top 1 or 2 consideration? And the truth is sometimes convenience and ease makes for everything. It's just about getting them at the right time in the right place when they might be ordering anyway, top of mind. And digital gives you the ability to do that, assuming you can keep and sustain that relationship you have with that guest. And that's a two-way street. It requires trust and utilization of the data. So the next topic we really thought was important, and you don't have to take our word for it, this is straight from Forrester as well, is, why are these organizations across the board being held back from this? Well, think about your organization today. There's probably someone who manages web, who manages events. There's probably a data person, an analytics team, someone who manages email offers, possibly a loyalty team. Oh, and then you have your mobile team. It's segmented across the channels rather than taking this connected customer experience view where you're saying, from a guest perspective, they don't care which team manages email or which team manages mobile. They care about how consistent their user experience is across this journey. And as you've seen, there is a lack of data sharing and cross-group cooperation along that 21-day customer journey. So how do you get started, right? Because this isn't a barrier. It's just an opportunity. One, start a cross-functional group. If you yourself are interested in doing more personalization at scale, start a cross-functional group. It doesn't have to be formal to start. And just meet with folks across your ops team and your loyalty team and your digital teams and your guest experience teams. And talk about questions like, hey, what data do we have access to? And what actions are we looking to drive? Pretty quickly there, you'll find that you probably have more than you thought, and you have probably a pretty clear understanding of how to drive some of those actions. Now, whether or not you operationalize those, that's for you to have that conversation internally. The second is demonstrate the value of a more robustly integrated strategy. And what I mean by this is, think back to that example you just saw. If we could increase guest frequency, not across everybody, just 10% of guests, we could drive 10% of guests to make one more trip per year. How much is that worth to the organization? I think you will be astonished by the value of this number. It's going to be larger than you expect. And then finally, what you saw today is a framework that you can use yourself. Be a customer. Clear your cookies, log out of everything, delete your applications, maybe have a partner of yours or somebody else you can trust, a friend, act as a guest across that customer journey and see what their interaction with your brand looks like. This can be in the first 21 days, or this can be over the life cycle, but it's important to look through the lens of the guest to understand how they see your brand. And then this last thing we've talked about quite a bit, but here at Bottle Rocket, we generally think about two different spectrums of the same guest journey, right? Traditionally, there's a lot of money spent on the advertising. How do you get a prospect through that acquisition and conversion funnel and get them to that moment where they've purchased? But what we need to really think about is how are we investing after that purchase? How are we driving engagement and retention so we can drive loyalty? Because the old euphemism of word of mouth is still your best source of truth remains true to this day. So how can you get more loyal customers sending the loyalty program to their friends to say, hey, I actually love this loyalty program. It's really convenient. Social proof remains one of the strongest places to drive value and acquisition at scale. So how are you driving the work along this part of the funnel from that digital purchaser customer through that customer experience into that LTV? And so think about some questions like, what is your team's North Star when it comes to driving retention? What's that look like? What experiments have you run in the last 60 days focused on retention? It's okay if there aren't answers to these questions, because I think the questions will also highlight the need to have some answers. And how does the executive team think about this stage of the guest journey? And I think this is oftentimes one of the most under-discussed moments is, how can we as an executive group talk more about what comes next? How can we talk more about our guest experience with our brand? It's so easy to get wrapped up in the BUs that we manage across all of the various enterprises, and growth scaling or hiring is a huge point of contention right now. But there are other elements to this journey, and the journey from a guest perspective is purely grounded in how you communicate with them. So I think what you've seen today is there's ample opportunity for you to personalize your experiences. And you've seen some QSR examples, but the same could hold true for retail. The same could hold true for healthcare. The same could hold true for almost any vertical out there. How are you leveraging these common strategies to drive the types of results that you seek? Tim, before we go to Q&A, is there anything else that you want to add to?
The piece that you talked around the org feeling disconnected in terms of the different teams going at customers from a one-to-one basis versus everybody in the same, this piece right here. So like in my personal experience on these different brands that I evaluated, I really felt that. So like whenever I ordered, I felt like when I was in the app experience, I felt very connected to the brand. Like there were live updates with Chick-fil-A as I went through. But after that, I felt like there was a disconnect. And in terms of the email, that I almost felt like that was being managed by a different team. Like they didn't technically know who I was. And so I personally think one of the biggest takeaways is, the collaboration piece here, I think is really important. You start working internally with people to understand what data there are, breaking down those silos and delivering a more cohesive experience together. I think that really solves a lot of problems and creates a lot of compounding effects that drive growth.
So you've heard us talk for 50 minutes. We definitely want to hear from you. I'm gonna close the deck out. We'd love to go to Q&A. Please feel free to raise your hand in the Q&A, and we will try to answer some questions. I think I saw one or two come through.
You've got one here, Peter. Did Taco Bell acknowledge your payment gateway failure? Did they follow up at all?
They did not. They did not. And I had hoped that they would. It got to a place where I was playing a game with them to see how many payment gateway failures I could get. That's never a good place to be in. And if they had followed up with me, I would have been very receptive to that message, because I think that's the type of use of data at scale that materially impacts guest perceptions. And really what this comes down to is a psychological principle of peak end effect. You don't have to provide a great guest experience throughout that entire journey. Not everything's perfect, but there are opportunities to have that moment of truth and that recovery. The psychological principle dictates that there's a way at the end to kind of say, hey, sorry you had that negative thing, but if you come back, we want to make it up to you. Those customers might end up being much more loyal and retained customers moving forward.
Good point. There's another question in here that just came in. As a marketer, how do I think about the Apple privacy changes coming? How will this change personalization? How can Amplitude help?
Wow. Well, Tim, you want to take that one to start?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about that one. I mean, it's not just Apple, obviously. I mean, it's also Google demising the cookieless browser, right? So like these have huge effects on people's ability to personalize. But I think if you have a strong first party data strategy where you have an app in people's hands and they're collecting that data, and you're using a tool like Amplitude, for example, to process and provide those insights into those messages, I think you're in a much stronger position in terms of being able to weather that storm. If you are, on the other hand, are somebody who are getting those insights, those customer properties that we were talking about, if you're getting those from a third party source, I think you're going to have a much bigger challenge there, because the identifier that is going to be linking all those people together on the back end is about to change. It's about to be a huge change. So anyways.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to be aware that a lot of those changes have to do with the funnel from acquisition to conversion, not necessarily the funnel from post-conversion journey to lifetime value. So yes, it will become harder to attribute I saw that person on social and shot a message they engaged with, which resulted in an order. That's going to become more challenging. But the minute you make that order, that data is yours to utilize, and it won't materially change in this future first-party data-oriented world.
Yeah, I would just add to that I think having, as Tim mentioned, having a really strong first-party data strategy is really important here, because obviously with some of the changes that are coming, the acquisition channels may get a little funky for a while. So it's going to become even more important for you to be able to retain and engage your customers, so that you're not having to constantly go back and reacquire them every time they delete your app, that they actually feel like your application on their mobile phone or on their desktop is, you know, a valuable use of their storage and space. So yeah, it was all going to come down to first party data, and that's where Amplitude's really going to be able to help you.
And you know, Dan, you bring up an important point, right? Which is, yes, people do delete applications, and that happens way more frequently than you may guess. But the reality is, you have to use all the channels at your disposal. If they're a loyalty member and they delete your application, but they're still logged on web, you still know a little bit about them. And you can use that web moment to possibly incentivize them back into an application funnel. If you've noticed they've had successful interactions in the past on their app, they were able to make web orders in the past, they may have churned that application for whatever reason. It doesn't mean they're not addressable in the future. But ask yourself, do you know from your organization how many people have had a loyalty order on web, a loyalty order on app, and then have gone back to delete the application? If not, that might be some important information to be able to start surfacing from your first party data sources.
Yeah. There are brands that we support that have like 5 times their order volume through their web application than they do their mobile application. So that could definitely be something.
Yeah. And it's app in. I was going to say, and the loyalty program as well helps you identify the same user across both mobile and web, so that you can have this complete journey. And it's not like I'm a web customer and what I see is completely different to the recommendations or the personalization you're making to me on mobile. So stitching that all together is super important. Another question for you, Tim, where is the best place to start your personalization journey? How, if people on the call today are thinking about getting started, where's the best place to start?
Good question. So for me personally speaking, going through this exercise, I think the most important first step to take is a baseline. So like go through your experience and 2 of your competitors, take $100 and go order from all of those consistently and get a sense of where your level of personalization actually is at. You can use the framework that we have to kind of slot yourself on that curve. And then also do it for your competitors. It's going to show you opportunities that people are doing that you can expand upon without having to pay for a lot of expensive strategy. After you have a real baseline, then it's about understanding what data that you have access to. Have those collaborative conversations like Peter was talking about with different people outside of your organization. If you're in marketing, bring in somebody from product, bring in somebody from the IT organization, have a cross-functional representation of people there and have a discussion about what is the data that we actually have that we could action on. And then lastly, I feel like it helps to have some kind of process to take your goals and your ideas of personalization and make them into tangible realities that are driving incremental improvement. What I mean by that is some type of actual step-by-step instruction. At Bottle Rocket and Amplitude, we have a personalization blueprint that we use to take people through that. If anybody would be interested in that, happy to follow up with us afterwards.
That's awesome.
Hey, Dan, and if I could add on to that just for a little bit, right? In the long run, this is never static. That's the last thing to remember, which is there is no state in which you put it on the shelf and you say, hey, personalization strategy is good to go. What I mean by that is imagine that today you have 2 cohorts or 3 cohorts. That might be non-logged in users, guest users, loyalty member users, and app users. In the future, you might very well have 10,000 cohorts. And they might get very, very, very specific. But you'll find that you're able to influence micro actions in each of those cohorts. So how do you get there, right? That seems very overwhelming. There is a framework for running a sprint-based methodology that drives experimentation across these cross-functional groups that you start finding an experiment, running an experiment, interpreting that data, looking at what customers want, coming up with a hypothesis, proving and disproving. The scientific method works really well in this use case.
Yeah, it's all really great. I love the framework that we have. We've collaborated on together. I think walking through brands through it, it's been really insightful just for starting with the data and then developing the tactic rather than starting with the tactic and trying to back into it with data. Alrighty, so this brings us to a close for today's webinar. So first of all, thank you, Peter and Tim, for doing all this insanely amazing research. I think I've taken away a lot. I hope that people on the webinar have taken away as much as I have. Some of the main talking points that I wrote down were, how are you engaging your customers in the first 21 days? How are you building loyalty? The second part around like making sure that you're not shipping your organizational structure and that data silos aren't creating a poor personalization experience. And that the last part being, you know, the journey and the fun really starts when the user actually is interacting with your product. It's not a top of funnel acquisition game anymore. Retention, engagement, and loyalty is where the LTV and the money is going to be made. So again, I want to wrap up by thanking our partner, Bottle Rocket, for joining us today. I want to thank all of you on the webinar for being here with us. We will send out a follow-up email with the link to the recording, as well as the ability to sign up for a free assessment, a free personalization workshop conducted by Bottle Rocket and Amplitude, if that's of interest for you and the brand that you represent. Thanks again for attending, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Bye for now.